Hello, everybody. I'm Alexis Brink. I'm a TAP from USATAA, and it's a privilege to introduce to you Dr. John McNeil. He's a licensed psychologist, and he's a past editor of the TAJ, and also a former board member of ITAA. He was trained by Bob and Mary Goulding and has been a student and a practitioner of redecision therapy for over 50 years. And you're practicing in California, and so much welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's nice to be with you. I've heard so much about you and all your dynamic teachings and everything. So why did you choose transactional analysis? What grabbed you?
Transactional analysis chose me. I was a senior in seminary, and one of my professors came back from a year of sabbatical in California, and he came back turned on like a light bulb. And because he'd learned all these new strategies of how to do psychotherapy. And one week he said, I'm going to turn the class over next week to the man I consider to be the smartest therapist in the world. Don't miss class. And into class the next week walked Bob Goulding, disheveled, shirt tailed out, untied shoes, big cigarette stains on his front of his teeth, and then he started to talk. And I said to myself, that's the smartest man I've ever heard in my life.
Wow.
And that's what happened.
That's a great introduction to him. What was the main lesson that you learned from Bob and Mary Goulding after that great introduction?
That people could change, that it was in their power to change. And that people could transform their lives, and that had that ability. And he gave a number of examples in that first lecture.
He gave examples?
He gave examples of people who changed their lives. And I remember thinking, this man can help me. He's smart enough.
Yeah.
And
so it was.
I had a lecture. I had an interview with him the next day. He was building his institute. So every place he had, every whistle stop where he had the opportunity to make a speech, he invited people to come train with him. So he interviewed with any seminary student who was interested. I interviewed with him. And during the course of the interview, I asked him, why do you do psychotherapy? He said, that's a good question. He said, because. He said, this won't happen in my lifetime. He said, but I truly believe that psychotherapy is the most effective way to someday end war in the world. He said, I truly believe that if people feel okay about themselves and feel okay about other people, they won't kill each other any longer. And then a little further into the interview, he said, I want you to come to California and train with me next year. We were having this conversation in Louisville, Kentucky. I said, I'll be there. And I was.
Wonderful. And that leads into injunctive messages, because that was a great part of his teaching as well, right? Injunctions. So what are injunctive messages?
Well, they are destructive messages that we receive when we're growing up, either from our parents or from society or from our schoolmates, that are prohibitive to our natural abilities to love ourselves, to be close to other people, to enjoy life, or to feel successful. For the most part, especially from parental figures, they aren't intended. Very, very few parents intend to do harm to their children, but there are messages that are embedded in the environment that say things like you shouldn't be here, or you shouldn't be close to people, or you should never feel successful no matter how far up the ladder you climb.
How can we see injunctive messages in action, and how can we see them in another's behavior, in somebody else's behavior?
If you know what to look for, they're quite obvious. Out of the work that I did with my training group in Los Angeles, we came up with the concept of coping behaviors. That is, if you have an injunctive message in your life, then you have to learn somehow to cope with it, because when you respond to that injunctive message, you're very young. And so the coping behaviors become embedded into our lives, and they seem natural to us. Somebody, you say to someone, "Well, you're certainly irritable all the time." Well, that's just who I am.
Mhm.
No, that's not just who they are. That's a habit. That's a coping behavior. They learn to do that particular kind of irritatedness because it solves some sort of problem when they were little. One of the things that Bob and Mary taught is that people made early decisions to the injunctions. They called them injunctions. They weren't seeking to make a lifetime decision. They were being pragmatic. They were responding to what's in front of them. It's just that then they repeated that hundreds of times, and it became part of the habit path of their life. And
Mhm.
we can recognize those habits.
Right.
As I'm talking to you, if I suddenly start doing this a lot and exposing the whites of my eyes to someone who knows how to recognize that sign, that's a great deal of hostility.
Mhm.
I might be coming across as the nicest person in the world. Don't you understand?
What
Except
what are useful aspect? What is the most useful aspect of injunctive messages, if any? Then,
by useful aspect, you mean useful to the process of therapy? Or I mean,
oh, do they have any positive aspect then, or
no,
is that really where you turn it into the coping behavior?
well, injunctive messages are limiting. You know, someone asked me once. They said, "Well, aren't there good injunctions?" Well, of course, there's good injunctions. You know, it's that the person asked said, "Well, are all injunctions negative?" Well, the ones that we're talking about are those that say I shouldn't be here, those messages that say I shouldn't enjoy intimate relationships, the ones that say I shouldn't be the person I am or know my own identity, or to feel secure or competent in life. Yeah, those are negative.
Mhm. Yes, and you expanded the number of injunctions
I,
from 15 to 25 and organized them into 5 categories.
that's right.
What prompted you to add to the Golding's original list of injunctions?
What a great question. So I worked all this material out with a training group I had for 11 years in Los Angeles. No training group, no chart. That we all worked it out together. I get the credit, but we all worked it out together. We kept finding coping behaviors for which there were no injunctions. And so we began to realize there were more injunctions or injunctive messages than had been identified by the Gouldings. And we
Mhm.
began to add to the list. And so that's where we arrived at 25. But it's a dynamic chart. It's not the 10 Commandments written in stone. I move an injunctive message from time to time to another category. I change the wordings in them as I find better wordings. I change the wordings. If you read, if you would read through all my articles, you'd find that I've had some injunctive messages and then I took them out.
Mhm.
So it's a dynamic chart. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be. This is the truth. You have to adhere to every word. It's like no. This can stimulate your thinking. What we did is we did this. We said if injunctions are real, then there's a footprint, and the footprint should be definable and recognizable. Now, one of the first things we did was we realized there were 2 decisions instead of 1. There's a despairing decision,
Mhm.
which just seems like the truth. Remember, an injunctive message is a believable falsehood. You ask
Mm.
if they're always negative. Yes, believable falsehoods are negative, but it's believable. And it leads to a despairing injunction like, that must be true. I must not, should be here. And then the child discovers their best attempt at health and make a defiant decision. And it relieves the feeling of helplessness. And
Mhm.
that defiant decision, repeated thousands of times, becomes the coping behavior. And we kept finding coping behaviors for which there was no injunctive message. So we kept expanding the list.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting and important. And in this workshop, you will concentrate on charts, right, that you have created.
Everyone will have a copy of the chart, and I will teach how to use the chart.
Yeah.
Because the Gouldings, my beloved teachers, pioneers in doing effective, what they thought would be short-term therapy. They never used these words, but they believed that you could rewire the brain with one really deeply impactful piece of psychotherapy. You could take a person back to an early scene, take them back into the scene where they made the early decision, help them in a Gestalt setting, change that to a new decision, and then new belief. I wrote an entire dissertation based on that belief. I studied one of their workshops.
I mean, that is wonderful. And that's what initially drew you to TA, right? That people can change.
Yes.
And so we go right back to that circle, which is beautiful. If there was one, we don't want to give away too much before the workshop. We're inviting everybody to come and take the workshop. But what is the one thing that you hope that people will take away from this workshop?
That people can change, and that in order to change, they have to be given information of what that change looks like. They need to be able to see what is not obvious to them, which is their coping behavior, and how it continues to solve short-term problems, but in the long term is destructive. Smoking cigarettes is a great example. Smoking cigarettes can be a coping behavior, very effective in the moment, irritating to the people around you, deadly if you do it for years and years and years, but in the moment it works. And what I want people to learn are the unexpected truths that people can discover that will help them to break the power of the injunctive message over their lives, and to give them a process by which they can incorporate that new truth into their lives. Unlike my beloved teachers, I see change as being a process that takes a lot of repetition over time and a lot of teaching, as opposed to gather a moment, have a powerful piece of work, you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tried to do that for 20 years to do their model.
So you will lay out how people can accurately diagnose and treat each of the injunctive messages. So that's wonderful. And I want to leave it here because I would like people to join us on March 5th at 12 Eastern. John has a lot more to say, obviously.
A lot more.
Yes. And there will also be time for questions, right? Questions, comments?
There will be time for questions.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to spend this time with you. And thank you so much for giving us a little teaser of your workshop. And we hope to see many people from the TA community and beyond join.
Thank you. And I'm excited. I'm excited to share what has been given to me for the last 50 years.
Yes, wonderful. And that's what we do. Thank you so much, Dr. McNeil.
You're so welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.